The newsagents.
I am announcing my intention to step down as First Minister and leader of my party.
An explosive trove of text messages has given fresh insight into Matt Hancock's early handling of the pandemic.
The first time we have ever seen a president, former or current, criminally charged. He is a criminal defendant entering a courtroom.
Prince Harry is the first member of the British royal family in 130 years to appear as a witness in court.
Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister, is going to stand down as an MP. He's quitting as an MP. Quote, I'm stepping
Just a few of the voices of 2023, the year that Boris Johnson resigned as an MP. Nicola Sturgeon exited the Scottish political stage to be replaced briefly by a blue forensic tent. And Matt Hancock thought it was a good idea to share his WhatsApp messages with a journalist.
And those are just the first 6 months of this year. On today's episode of The Festive Newsagents, we should have a special logo saying The Festive Newsagents. We're going to look back from January to June. Welcome to The Newsagents.
The newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And it's December the 27th, sort of.
If you believe that, you'll believe anything. The idea of getting Emily Maitlis in on the 27th of December, I don't think so.
I haven't left.
No.
I've just sat here in my throne-like chair, waiting for people, wise kings, to visit me.
Look, we did the question and answer session on Christmas Day, and we have been here for the last 48 hours waiting to do this edition on the 27th of December.
Right, exactly right.
Should we get started?
Yeah, January.
January.
What happened in January? Can you remember, dear listener, what happened in January on the Newsagents?
Can I just say, first of all, our first full year of the Newsagents.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a moment.
We've survived.
We've survived.
Haven't killed each other.
No, haven't killed each other. No scandal.
And when I said
apart
dear
from your
listener,
energy bills.
I don't think there was just one listener. I hope there's more than one.
Well, who knows by the end of this? People might have decided to make a New Year's
I mean,
resolution.
aside from all the strikes that were taking place in the public sector in January, Maitlis and I managed to get on an aeroplane and we flew to Zurich and we went to Davos, where the undernourished and the poor of the world gather each year. And Keir Starmer was there and we did a big sit-down interview with Sir Keir.
I mean, that was the weirdest thing of all. Let's not forget that Keir Starmer is not a natural Davos inhabitant. And the fact that he was there was the reason we were there. And he essentially had a big T-shirt on, metaphorically, saying, I am in Davos. I am the Labour leader, but I'm in Davos. And I think the point he was trying to make was that he was the party of business, that they were talking to people in Europe on the international stage, that he wanted to be seen in all the places that actually the Prime Minister at the time wasn't. And we'd planned out this long interview, hadn't we? And at the end we thought, I know, we've just got to do a bit of quickfire, the fun questions that actually people remember more. And we remember that he was an Arsenal fan. We were kind of thinking about like who do you want to sit next to at a game? And I was like, oh, Piers Morgan's an Arsenal fan. Who can we get as a kind of like this or this? We called up Tom, our ex-athletic, The Athletic.
Not ex-athlete.
No, not
very,
ex-athlete.
very much not ex-athlete.
But Tom used to work for The Athletic, and we said, OK, Tom, come on, give us your Arsenal fans. Give us your Arsenal fan. There was a quick rustle. And then Tom came back with Osama bin Laden. At which point we decided
who is rather dead.
Who is very dead, but still it transpires an Arsenal fan.
What? Wait. He was an Arsenal fan, bin Laden?
Bin Laden was, from his caves of Waziristan, an Arsenal fan.
He had his Sky Sports subscription and was
VPN,
watching every weekend.
no doubt.
Right, OK.
Anyway, dead. So we said no to bin Laden, Piers Morgan versus, and then we suddenly went, oh my God, Jeremy Corbyn. Biggest Arsenal fan in the political left, apart from Keir, obviously. And so we then sat Keir Starmer down, did our interview with him, and then John said,
you're an Arsenal fan. I'm going to give you the names of two die-hard Arsenal fans, and you've got to choose who you'd rather sit next to. Piers Morgan or Jeremy Corbyn?
Piers Morgan.
That was quick.
That was quick. That was very quick.
The other thing we asked him was, what do you prefer?
Davos or Westminster?
Davos.
Why?
Because Westminster is too constrained. And, you know, it's closed and we're not having meaning. Once you get out of Westminster, whether it's Davos or anywhere else, you actually engage with people that you can see working with in the future. Westminster is just a tribal shouting place.
And that came back pretty quickly too. And so I guess, what's this got to do with anything? It was the year that Keir Starmer tried to reassert very clearly the identity of who he was. The Jeremy Corbyn, Piers Morgan answer, playing furiously into what we now know, the second half of the year, how he has distanced himself from the anti-Semitism of the Corbyn years, particularly in his response to Israel. And I think the Davos thing playing into the man that he wants us to see as
future Prime
Labour's
Minister.
business.
Well,
yeah.
Good year, bad year.
Good
It's got to
year.
be a pretty good year, right? I mean, he's started the year with, I think it was an average of 19-point poll lead. Now I think an 18-point poll lead. So to sustain it, and we're now 2 years on from the Conservatives being ahead in any single poll, to sustain that lead over the course of a year with as little as potentially 5 months to go before a general election, good year.
He has also done as Labour leader. He's got rid of some of the barnacles under the boat that were kind of stopping their progress in the water. He's got rid of some of the stuff that makes him unelectable. He's made some changes. He's shaken up the team a bit. I think Keir Starmer will be well satisfied.
Or he's flip-flopped, is the other way round, that he's rode back throughout the course of the year on more and more of the policies that he established in 2021. And he will have given some people, I think, fuel to say, oh my God, what do you actually stand for?
The Tories would have much preferred it if he'd maintained policies that made him unelectable, and he hasn't done that. And so I think that there are still big questions for him, but overwhelmingly, Keir Starmer, I'd say, tick, not a bad year.
And just to go back to exactly where we started in January, which was like the month of strikes, what have we got over the course of this Christmas period? We've got more strikes.
Yeah,
so
3
January,
days.
the next January is going to have more strikes. And I still cannot quite believe, to be honest, that Sunak and the government have simply not basically drawn up a deal with anybody who is still striking, purely on the basis that you want to start 2024 with a clean slate and the best possible fish you could get. And starting the year with more NHS strikes when you've already got waiting lists at all basically an all-time record is just stupid politics. And frankly, in terms of the money, let it be Labour's problem if they come in.
Before we leave January completely,
You went in January?
Oh, God. Before we leave January completely, you went and interviewed Nicola Sturgeon. She was then the Colossus, still bestriding the Scottish Highlands and Lowlands. And then in February, she goes.
I know, this is another one of those just amazing. I can't quite believe it was this year. It sort of feels so long ago, but it was an amazing, extraordinary moment. I remember we were here, Emily, you and I doing
was
the show,
half
weren't
term.
we? Yeah, it was half term around that time, right? And it was, I mean, when I went up and we did the show in January with her, she was obviously in some political trouble over gender self-ID. Who'd have thought it would be Isla Bryson, of all people, that would be the nemesis that would bring Nicola Sturgeon, the Colossus of Scottish politics, down. She was in some trouble. She was in pretty good form during the interview. She was obviously, though, I think, sort of flashing sort of these moments of sort of anger. You know, there's this moment in the interview we did with her where she basically suggested that a lot of the opponents of the bill were kind of racist and homophobic and all of this sort of stuff. And that was a sort of comment that started a series of other events, which one way or the other led to her resignation, which still nonetheless, even though she was in political trouble, took everyone by surprise. And of course, then it was just the start of a series of events after she left being First Minister, which descended into the SNP being completely enveloped in a corruption scandal, which has continued to rock Scottish politics ever since. And it is basically, again, if we're just thinking like big picture about the year, 2023 is the first year, basically since 2011, arguably since 2007, when the SNP edifice, the Colossus, which has just basically bestrode Scottish politics since that time, started to look firmly shaky and vulnerable.
I remember watching her resignation speech and I was taking notes at the time. I'm looking back at those notes now and I've got in block capitals. I do. I know in my heart that time is right. This is not a reaction to short-term pressures. Oh, yeah. And she goes on to talk about her life in politics, how she never had the chance to have a coffee, how she wants to spend more time with her niece and nephews. It sounded like this beautifully thoughtful, well-constructed resignation speech. But of course, cynics that we are, we were all trying to work out, but why? And I think we worked out that the ID thing hadn't gone well for her, but it wasn't a resigning issue. And there was just something that had piqued my attention the week before, which is police have reopened an investigation. And we didn't want to put 2 and 2 together at the time, but about 48 hours later, it became clear. And this was the response of the leader of the party in Westminster, Stephen Flynn, when we said, can you explain 1 or 2 things that as journalists we just don't understand?
It's been tough, to say the least.
I mean, Hamza Yousaf has literally been First Minister for a week. I mean, it's just over a week. And a week after he's got his feet under the table and into the job, The person he took over from has her house searched and her husband is arrested. I mean, come on, that's looking pretty weird, isn't it?
I'm not going to sit here and try and explain that as not looking probably a bit bizarre to some people. I'll be honest with you, it came as a little bit of a shock to see those images.
So let me relate this to January, because we were just saying, did Keir Starmer have a good year? Well, one of the things that made Keir's year good was just how bad it was for the SNP. Yeah. And the fact of the matter is that Nicola Sturgeon's resignation became a kind of cascade effect, didn't it? That there was suddenly more bad news. There was the investigation, the criminal investigation. There were arrests. There is still potential, a cloud hanging over them. There was a messy leadership contest. Humza Yousaf, what's he for? All of those things have persisted throughout the year, and allowing Labour to look at the electoral map of Britain and think, OK, there are a few more seats in Scotland in play now than we ever thought would be the case.
One of which has now been won by Labour in a by-election.
Yeah. I mean, look, in a way, almost everything that could have gone right for Starmer has gone right. Almost everything that could have gone wrong for his opponents pretty much has gone wrong. And there is just, of course, one qualification probably in terms of the Scottish political scene, which is still really interesting, which is although the SNP have declined in popularity, according to the polls, they usually nip and tuck first or around first place still, albeit without much bigger reduction. Unlike the Conservatives, they may feel down, but they don't feel completely out. And then the other thing is, of course, the actual cause of independence itself continues to attract a great deal of support. That hasn't really. The SNP's decline.
It's just looking for a new home.
It's like the two things have started to become decoupled for the first time since 2014,
well,
which is really
maybe
interesting.
We should say the rise of the Alba Party might be the unforeseen 2024 gem.
Or it's more that the Labour Party, if it does win its old seats back in the Central Belt, those Labour MPs are going to, and Asawa, if he were to become First Minister at some point as well, has to navigate the yes vote because it will be part of their coalition in a way that Scottish Labour has never had to do before. And that will put tensions on the Central Party in government and the party potentially in government in Holyrood as well. Just at the other point this year, where the sort of constitutional question has come into focus again, because for the first time ever, which happened this year, Westminster has blocked a law which has come from Holyrood, i.e. gender self-ID. So I think the constitutional question will continue to be a big one in 2024.
Let's go on to March, because I remember there was a day I had a breakfast that morning with a Tory cabinet minister, and I came into the office and Gabriel is very excited, said,
Our producer Gabriel.
Our producer Gabriel.
Not the angel
said,
Gabriel.
No. Our producer, not the angel Gabriel.
No,
Certainly not an
not.
angel.
No,
God,
no.
Said to me, oh, have we got a treat today? And I said, what? I've got a good guess. I think you'll like it. What? Go on, guess. And I thought, oh, Gabriel, shut up. I'm not going to guess. And he told me we had Matt Hancock coming in. Yep. Matt Hancock was relatively freshly back from I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, eating kangaroo's anus and that sort of stuff, and had really he hadn't been answerable on a whole lot of things. And he came in with his Pret sandwich, borrowed Lewis's makeup, came into the studio and...
My blusher.
Yeah, exactly. And he was sort of defensive, it was like a reconstructed Matt Hancock who was trying out a new image after the terrible press that he'd had for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it was an amazing interview, an amazing day here, just because it was so unexpected. And his reaction to what we thought basic questions about what had happened was so visceral.
But what has happened to you over the past 2 years?
Yeah.
You know, in office, then you're forced to resign over... in relationship
falling in love with somebody,
falling in love. Well,
falling in love and breaking your own rules.
Lewis,
you're the
actually,
one who,
just stop.
You're
Lewis,
the one who
stop. Lewis, stop. I'm a human being, right?
Yeah. And you're,
okay.
And you're a Secretary of State.
Don't interrupt me now, because I'm going to say something that I'd like you to listen to. I'm a human being. John's question is leading up to essentially how do you cope with this amount of stuff as a human being? And part of the answer is that, of course, politicians, have to take the rough with the smooth. And I have learned a huge amount about resilience. But I also now am just not interested in having people just go over old coals again and again and again
And I think what it reminded me of is just the extent to which in politics, how, particularly in modern politics and the way the media works now, how completely all-consuming it can be. And I thought, we were chatting afterwards, weren't we, John, thinking like, look, this is a guy who is still pretty fragile. He just hasn't really internalised. So he kept saying, I don't want to talk about that. I don't have to talk about it because, I owe it to myself. And there was so much about almost modern psychology and modern mores in the way he was speaking. He's become a bit millennial, Matt Hancock, right? Matt Hancock, the millennial, is like, I don't want to talk it because I owe it to myself. And it's like, no, actually, you do because you're a politician and Secretary of State, and get used to these questions because they're going to be following you the rest of your life.
But the questions that he didn't want to answer, which he said, I've answered and don't want to go near, were COVID questions.
Yeah.
And we have seen the COVID inquiry and the devastating evidence that we've heard from it, where you've had ministers squabbling with each other, loathing each other, WhatsApp groups where they're slagging each other off, government by chaos, government by make it up as you go along.
They should see our WhatsApp groups, by the way.
Well,
news agents, I think that's bad.
Totally. But we are mercifully running the country at the time of a pandemic, which means that our WhatsApps aren't quite as important. And yet the loathing that existed within the government that we have now seen at the time of COVID, and the unsuitability of so many of the people who were having key jobs at the time, whether it be Matt Hancock and people in government saying he was useless, or Boris Johnson, or whoever it happens to be.
We'll be back in a moment with April.
Who is she?
Cruelest month.
This is The Newsagents.
So April was the first time that we saw a former president of the United States as a defendant in a criminal trial. Now, the weird thing is that come December, come January, we're all feeling pretty used to seeing Donald Trump fight yet another court case. Yeah. But April was the first time, and it felt quite explosive. And the case that it all began with was the New York District Attorney, which looked at his business dealings and a potential payout to a sex worker, Stormy Daniels, and whether he had fudged campaign financing. Now, in the scheme of things, that all seems like pretty small fry when it comes to Trump. But at that moment, it was the beginning of the first times.
He looked furious. The photos of him coming out of the court and what was passed as a perp walk, he looked furious. But he very quickly learned that these court appearances were fundraising and campaign opportunities.
They were rocket fuel.
And he now goes to court, not just to say not guilty, he goes to court to say witch hunt, political interference, gerrymandering, constitutional interference, it's unsafe, they're trying to get me, Joe Biden is crooked, this is Joe Biden's Department of Justice doing this. And all the time trying to politicise and weaponise the Justice Department, which is supposed to be utterly independent of the political process, and undermining confidence in another US institution. We saw him undermine confidence in the electoral process with January the 6th, and now we're seeing him undermine confidence in the judicial system and using it as part of his re-election campaign for 2024.
It was a newsagent's first as well, because we worked through the night. We came armed with wine and crisps, I believe, and
we had to smuggle in the wine, I seem to remember, because booze not allowed on the premises or something.
Luckily, the crisps were.
No one told me that.
The security guard told us off for bringing booze in.
Oh, my God. Well, this is going to
that was, I guess, for afterwards. But we were kind of working till 1, 2 in the morning, and our brilliant team were working 3 hours later than that to get the whole thing edited and up and running. And it did have the sense of sort of almost had that sort of election night buzz to it, didn't it? But I remember us commenting at the time that we thought the district attorney, who'd written, I think, 30 indictments, had gone a bit too far. It all looked a bit woolly. It all looked a bit hard to pin down. And I think that is still the question that we're asking now, is yes, we understand that the former president shouldn't be above the law, but are they going about it the right way? And I think that is the question. Even, the Democrats who want to see him pulled down keep asking. All the legal experts keep asking, is this being done in the right way? Is it watertight enough to actually remove him from the ballot or put him behind bars or convict him in any shape or form? Or is it just rocket fuel for a guy who loves the publicity?
Good year, bad year, Biden?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I think that dealing with inflation,
electorally, good year.
Electorally, good year. But his position in the polls, bad. The more that he goes on about how energetic I am and how youthful I feel, the more you think you're 81 years old.
The rumour mill is definitely louder at the end of this year than it was at the beginning. People are sort of still talking about how we got in this place.
Well,
that poll coming out, 70% of people do not support either of the main party candidates. 70% of Americans disenfranchised, politically homeless. That's kind of a big thing to
Israel
do.
Gaza has split his electoral coalition right down the middle. He struggled to navigate that between the older and younger bits of the coalition.
Very quick leadership, actually.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, again,
Quick
it's
off
a bit
the
like
ground
Ukraine.
there.
I mean, in terms of what he's done, he's navigated it with some aplomb. But, it's like you just said, Emily, I suppose if we'd been talking this time last year, we would have been fresh off the back of the 2022 midterms, where, the Dems did much better than anybody would have possibly expected them to have done. He seemed in a pretty strong position. He ends this year feeling much more frail, I think.
Look, I mean, to put it crudely, there has always been, and it's talked about openly in the US, the bedwetting tendency of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And the bedwetters are really wetting the bed at the moment.
That's not just Biden. Is that okay? I don't know. Should we move on?
No, it's good.
I think another month.
Another month. Okay, fine. Good. Okay. So that takes us to May. And that is, of course, the month of the coronation.
It's been a very royal year.
It's been a very royal year because we've had King Charles, his first full year on the throne, not quite as important as our first full year podcasting with his show, but, not far away. His very drizzly coronation, which I just seem to remember drawing the short straw of attending. I didn't see you two there. You were probably on the balcony. You were on the balcony, as I recall,
Almost
obviously,
certainly.
Dame Emily.
Yeah.
I was broadcasting from here and doing a little bit of American television, I seem to
Oh, right, okay, yes, of course. Well, Rory and I, he doesn't like to be called cameraman, video operator. Videographer Rory.
Rory.
Of course, yeah, going absolutely drenched in probably the wettest spring for years. And it's good year, bad year for Charles? Fine year?
Good
Do you know
year.
what?
Good year?
I remember us talking about the monarchy after the Queen's death, and me being, of all three of us, probably the least convinced by the kind of whole, what she'd stood for in my life.
Yeah.
I would say that I have a different relationship with King Charles, precisely because I feel like I know what he stands for already. And I know the whole point of a constitutional monarchy is that they don't vote and they're not political and that blah, 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 blah. But actually, with King Charles, you do know what he stands for. And I find that vaguely reassuring. And I think he has had an amazing year. I think the speech he made at COP, where he phrased it all in questions rather than statements, but went as close as he could to sort of flying the flag against global warming. The visits he's done to Macron in Paris, building bridges with Europeans, the Greek flag, building bridges that our Prime Minister literally tried to destroy the week before. I think it's been a quietly brilliant year for him, actually, because A, the monarchy has done what the monarchy's meant to do, which is just keep turning. And B, he's kind of remained the person that we knew without riling too many people.
But, I mean, I find it hard, though, with Charles to escape the idea of his being such a transitional monarch, largely because of his age and the fact that we all know that one way or the other, he hasn't that much time to do anything with this job that he had this lifelong apprenticeship for. I mean, you're right. I mean, he's had I think in one sense it's a success, because I remember before the Queen died, everyone was going, it's so hard to imagine anyone else being there. And perhaps there'll be this sort of a wave of kind of revulsion about the idea of it not being him and his taking the throne and Camilla being the Queen. There's been none of that. There's been no sense of the monarchy kind of grinding into the sand or anything like that. But I do sort of feel this is a sort of placeholder monarch.
I call that second term. You see, I think if you think of it in presidential terms, which obviously we always do, your second term is where you get shit done.
But what is that?
Planting trees, building bridges, getting out there. I think it's fundamental.
There are people I know who work at the palace who say, yeah, it's all good, but we don't feel we've got a sense of direction. We don't know what beat we're marching to with King Charles. I would say, actually, so they kind of feel there's a lack of strategic direction. What is my period on the throne meant to be about? What are our priorities? But I think that there are things that he is doing. He's carrying on where he left off. I mean, the Prince's Trust, which I kind of, was an ambassador for years ago and did various things, which I thought was fantastic charity, is now the King's Trust. He wants to carry that work on. So there are bits of what Charles has always done. Him going to COP, him being concerned about the environment, and also building the relations with Europe. I think those are things that Charles is doing and trying to keep the Commonwealth together. Those are his priorities. I don't think the priorities have changed from the Prince of Wales to the King. Now, obviously, he's having to be a bit more circumspect about it. And also, just against expectation. If measured against expectation, which was that he would be rather hopeless and ill-equipped and not really suited.
Well, just not his mum.
Not his mum. I think there has been so few ripples in the water since he's taken over.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the problem. I think he's got to start creating some ripples if he's going to be anything other, historically speaking, other than a placeholder between his mother, who's a very substantial figure, and his son, who might yet be another one.
I think they'll get braver, actually, in terms of what they feel able to say.
Yeah.
We should also mention another royal who has been very visible this year, not in a coronation sense, but in a legal sense, and that was Prince Harry's fight against the Murdoch Empire.
Good year, bad year,
against
Harry?
the Mirror. Well, it ends on
pretty good, right?
On a pretty good note, I'd say.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't need the money, but the win that he got just before Christmas really, I think, left a lot of people very angry. And in Harry's book, that's doing quite well. Yeah,
it's vindication, isn't it? Really? For him?
He's taken a beating over some of the stuff that he has done. There is the lobby that is anti-Meghan, anti-Harry, that is substantial.
It's getting quite tired, that, I think, now.
Are they as popular in America as they were? Probably not. Do they still have a clear kind of path of... I mean, going back to your point, Lewis, about what is this king for? I mean, what is Prince Harry for? Well, it may not be that he's the most successful podcaster. It may not be that he's the maker of the greatest documentaries. All that sort of stuff seems to be going south.
I think we have to pray not at this point.
Exactly.
I mean, we don't need
any
competition
more
from Prince Harry right now.
But what he has done over the phone hacking and all the rest of it, that is significant.
And he's just legacy.
And this is something we are going to be talking about a lot in 2024 as well. We'll be back with June, but we're going to take a little break now.
Who's June?
This is The Newsagents.
June.
Whitfield.
There is one event on one night, a Friday. Lewis had just done his show on LBC.
Two shows
on LBC.
Yeah. No. We do a Friday version of this show, John. I know.
Do we?
Yeah, I know. Some of us toil in obscurity of a Friday evening. Yeah. No,
so Lewis had done the Newsagents Friday edition, LBC. Emily was making cocktails in Sussex.
Doesn't sound like me at all.
Tom, our editor, was in Benidorm. I was in Venice. Laura, our producer, was about to host a dinner party. And we were all finally set for a lovely Friday evening until we hear...
One man wrecks it all.
Boris Johnson's political career, for now, at least, and he's hinting at for now, his political career is over. He has dominated the political stage in this country. Whether you like him or dislike him, he has been one of the major players of the last 10 years, 15 years in British politics. Good year, bad year, Boris Johnson. Bad year.
Can I just say, if there's one thing he knows, it's that no journalist will be at work on a Friday
he's
evening.
taking the piss.
If there's one thing he understood, it was how to get your timing so right that everyone was cursing.
Yeah, I think he was trying to get us. You would have known we'd have just put Friday's show to bed. They'd have known that you would have been doing your cocktails in Sussex. You were in one of your many jaunts.
A martini's not a simple thing, Lewis.
No, I know, particularly the way you make it.
So it was just the most jaw-dropping moment to think, wow, that's it. Is the Johnson era over? The long shadow that he has cast over the Conservative Party.
Long Boris.
And the Privileges Committee report into his conduct, which he took exception to and thought, screw it, I'm off.
And we shouldn't forget the timing of that was such that because he appeared before the Privileges Committee about this question about whether he lied to the House of Commons about Partygate, we kind of knew the way that this was going. And what does he decide to do? The week after we're due to get the report, Boris Johnson decides to spike it, to get out ahead of it, to put out that style. I remember it was at 8 o'clock because we just had the news on the LBC show, and then I noticed on Twitter this had happened, and we just roll right through with it. He decided to do that to spike it, to get ahead of it, and he departed in the most, it's almost glib to say it, but it is true, in the most Trumpian fashion that you can possibly imagine, leathering and attacking every institution of Parliament, which we should never forget, that committee, cross-party, Conservative majority, and they all unanimously said the same thing.
He literally used witch hunt. It was a 1,000-word sort of scream of bile, I think I remember describing it as. And he hit out at political enemies for targeting him, and he said it was sad. Even sad is a Trump word, right? It's kind of like he says he's appalled at how he can be forced out anti-democratically by a committee chaired and managed by an MP with an egregious bias, right? So I think he did Trump witch hunt bingo in that 1,000-word resignation speech, the speech of an angry little man.
And also what was interesting that flowed from it was that there was the huffing and puffing from some of Boris's acolytes, but not that many. No. Not that many were prepared to die in the last ditch with Boris. Nadine Dorries said she would leave Parliament immediately. Then didn't.
But we should take people behind the scenes, because you just finished doing the episode in which Nadine Dorries announced her resignation because she'd learned that she hadn't got the peerage. And Nigel Adams, who also hadn't got the peerage, resigned. We were about to go to bed / drink cocktails thinking it was a story of the resignation of Nadine Dorries and Nigel Adams. And then suddenly everything turned around. And I remember that sort of furious 24 hours where we couldn't work out who had sparked off who. Did Nadine know that Boris was going, so she had gone? Did she find out that he wasn't going to give her the thing? And it was all about the list that Boris Johnson was meant to have sent to Rishi Sunak, and whether Rishi Sunak had removed Nadine Dorries or whether she hadn't been on it in the first place. That was her own little thing about not getting into the Lords. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson was furious about his thing. And for the podcasters of this world, it meant a complete redo.
Well, someone please think of the podcasters.
Please think of the podcasters.
Honestly, no one ever does. But this is,
Should we do a charity appeal for podcasters?
Save the podcasters?
Save the podcasters.
Yeah, maybe.
We could have that sort of slightly winsome voice on.
Just £10 a month will get John Sopel his first holiday of the year by the end of next January. But again, thinking about whether Rishi Sunak has had a good or bad year, in many ways he's had a very bad year. But one way you could argue he's had a good year is at the very least, and I think it really was a pivotal moment politically of the year, Boris Johnson's removal from Parliament did without doubt remove a substantial internal political threat. If Johnson were still there and he had had the by-elections that he's had, that he's still languishing at the polls, there would still be, at the very least, endless speculation. Whether he would have gone for it and got it is another question, but there would be endless chatter in a way that only Boris Johnson can generate about his future and whether he would wound or kill or whatever it were to be. So it's good to get rid of him.
So did Rishi Sunak make the most of it, though? Could he have done more to define himself differently?
Yeah, I think so.
Could the past look at the way that governing was happening when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister? We are in a different space now. I know he said it a few times, but he didn't define himself by his...
It's exactly the same problem that we've been talking about the Republican Party candidates, which is you don't want to hit out at somebody that the grassroots of your party still loves. But until you actually make that case for you being a different type of political animal, you're never actually going to show your true colours.
I don't know whether we are going to stay in the studio now for the next 2 days or whether we will go and then come back into the studio on the 29th. But we're going to do from July to December on the 29th of December.
See you next time.
You
Bye.
lucky people.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.